If I like to talk about the propaganda, MMA and wmma, the saying about boxing being a martial art. Boxing is not a martial art. It's a contact sport. There is a difference between martial art and contact sport. Like football is a contact sport. Hockey is a contact sport. You have to look at really what martial means. It means warfare. This is what the martial arts was developed for. To be able to do battle on the battlefield and hurt, maim, and kill your opponent. Really, just maim and kill your opponent. Boxing was not developed like that. It was developed as a sporting event that goes back thousands of years. It was never meant to be for self-defense, although you can use boxing for self-defense. You're going to end up breaking your hand if you do. There's rules in boxing. There are no rules in martial arts. And on the sports side of martial arts there is, and I'll get to that later. But boxing was developed as a sport. It was never a self-defense side to boxing, like there is in karate, jiu-jitsu. That in the sporting events that take place with karate and judo, there's rules. A lot of techniques are left out because they're too deadly. There's nothing left out in boxing. Just because you're throwing fists doesn't make it a martial art. You can take a tire iron and swing it around and defend yourself with it. Does that mean you're a martial artist? You hit somebody over the head and say, well, look at me, I'm a martial artist now because I just hit somebody over the head with a tire iron. It doesn't work that way. But I'm sure if you could bring a tire iron into the cage, and the MMA people are saying, that's a martial art now. It doesn't work that way. Sorry, it doesn't. Wrestling, there's two different types of wrestling. Submission wrestling, which you could consider a martial art, and amateur wrestling you see at the Olympics, that's not a martial art either. That's just takedowns and pins. Football, for example, 185-pound defensive back, using the right tackling techniques, take down a fullback weighing maybe sometimes 40 pounds heavier. Does that make that defensive back a martial artist because he can take down somebody bigger than him? No. And when did you ever hear of boxers being called martial artists, or boxing being called a martial art? That started when MMA came around because they wanted to justify what they're doing in the cage as a martial art. It's not. It's a street fight. When did you ever hear of Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, George Foreman, Roberto Duran ever called martial artists? You didn't. They were known as boxers. Bruce Lee, Chuck Norris, they're martial artists because they use their entire body. Boxers only use their fists. It's done as a sport. It's not meant for the battlefield like martial arts was developed for. You can look all this up online. But I know you're going to get some people who say, well, it's still a martial art. It's not. It is a contact sport. Like hockey. Hockey players duke it out in the rink. Are they martial artists because they're throwing fists at each other? No. They're not. Now fencing's different. Fencing comes from a martial art. Using a sword that was on the battlefield to kill your opponent. But yes, you could call fencing then a martial art. Boxing was not used that way. It's a Greek Olympic sport. It even goes back further than that. But the Greeks used it as a sporting event. They had their own form of martial art used on the battlefield. When it wasn't boxing. Again, I could say you can look all this up. Then you can come to your own conclusion if you really think it's a martial art or not. If you do, fine. It's your opinion. But it really isn't. And don't let this MMA propaganda fool you into thinking it was. Because before this happened, MMA came about, you never heard of boxing being called a martial art. It was only a sport. That's all for now. Leave your comments and rate it.